Whether you like it or not, Trinidad has been in the crosshairs of the US military, not as a target, thankfully, but as a facilitator. So yeah, we in history a bit different from other Caribbean islands. I am not an historian. I just did a little bit of research online. So take it how you may. If anything needs correcting, please drop a comment now. Hey, my Triple E people, and welcome back to the driver's seat. How are you doing? So where are we going today? I will tell you in a bit. Since the beginning of time, well actually around World War II, this is how Wallerfield and Fort Reed began. Yeah, that's where we are going. So, let we go. The airfield was named in honor of Major Alfred J. Waller, a World War I pilot who died in 1967. Now, the entire area is known as Wallerfield. Right now, we are heading west along Farm Road in Touré, Sangre Grande. A really nice place. Really nice, peaceful place with lots of cows. Okay, back to Wallerfield and Fort Reed. Long before the United States officially entered World War II, military planners realized that the traditional North Atlantic route via Greenland and Iceland, that is those cool places up north, that a southern route was envisioned to ensure a year-round flow of aircraft to British forces in North Africa and beyond. However, the US lacked the necessary stepping stones, literally islands, to make the leap across the Atlantic. So what happened? In came the Destroyers for Bases Agreement in September 1940. The turning point came in July 1940 with a high-stakes swap between President Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Britain was desperate for naval protection against German U-boats, while the US needed strategic outposts. So FDR took up the suggestion by a New York group supporting aid to Britain, where the US traded 50 aging Great War era destroyers, where the US traded 50 aging Great War era destroyers to Britain in exchange for 99-year leases on land to build naval and air bases in British territories. So they exchanged 50 destroyers, ships, in exchange for 99-year leases in the British territory. In the Caribbean, bases were constructed in 7 British colonies, including Bermuda, Bahamas, Jamaica, St. Lucia, Antigua, Trinidad, and what was then British Guyana. We are now on the Eastern Main Road, popularly called the Valencia Stretch. Now, Antigua, St. Lucia, and Burnham in Jamaica were not considered primary airfields. The air plan was to begin flying up from Florida at the Morrison and Homestead Airfield, then to Borinquen in Puerto Rico, and then to our Wallerfield in Trinidad and Tobago. Fast forward a bit and picture this. For a few terrifying minutes, nobody even realized what was happening. The smoke from the Aruba attack hadn't even cleared before the engines at Wallerfield began to roar. For months, the Americans had been feverishly preparing for this exact moment. Wallerfield had been built as a shield in 1941, but on that morning in 1942, it became a weapon. When the news of the torpedo in Aruba hit the command center, our $82 million airfield at Wallerfield Base here in Trinidad swung into action. It wasn't a rehearsal anymore. What had happened? In the darkness before dawn on 16 February 1942, German U-boats were already inside Aruba, sliding straight into the St. Nicholas Harbor and firing torpedoes at oil tankers sitting quietly at anchor. Ships erupted. Oil flooded the water. Flames rolled across the harbor. Then one of the German U-boats casually surfaced and opened fire on the refinery. This was not just any attack. It was an attack on the fuel that powered the Allied South Atlantic route. And when the emergency response finally kicked in, when the Caribbean realized it was under direct submarine attack, aircraft were rushed in from Puerto Rico and Trinidad. From Wallerfield, they had to fly more than 600 miles before they could even begin searching for the submarines. In real terms, that meant close to 2 hours in the air just to reach the Aruba area. From the very Wallerfield runways, the 59th Bombardment Squadron was scrambled. You would have heard the heavy rhythmic thrum of Douglas A-20 Havocs and the deep drone of B-18 Bolos taxiing through what was now the Wallerfield, taxiing through what is now the Wallerfield racing circuit. Imagine those bombers lifting off, 300 pounds of high explosive top under the wings, heading west into the Caribbean blue to hunt the German wolf packs. We are now in the Valencia environs. Oh, carajo. Right there, boy. And it's right there going here. And here we have one of the western entrance or exit of Fort Reed. Have a look at the stone pillars on the sides of the road. Here was once manned by the American military. And we are inside what was once the American base here at Wallerfield. Right, back to the story. When the planes reached the patrol zone near Aruba, they were ordered to sweep the vital tanker route. They were ordered to sweep the vital tanker route between Aruba and Maracaibo, the oil artery that kept the Allied war effort alive. So Trinidad's response was fast, but more importantly, it was also a warning. Because that first strike at Aruba proved something brutally clear to the Allied planners. Despite their limitations, the presence of aircraft from Trinidad and across the Caribbean forced the German submarines to alter their approach and made it far harder for them to move freely against Allied shipping. If the Caribbean was a shield, Wallerfield was the gateway. It served as the most critical node in a massive V-shaped aerial bridge, the South Atlantic route, connecting the industrial heartland of America with the front lines of 3 continents. As we said, the journey began in the airfields of Florida to Puerto Rico, but the real challenge started once the wheels touched down at Wallerfield, Trinidad. Here in the humid heat of the Komodo Plains, the route tightened into a precision-engineered logistics machine. After servicing engines and topping off fuel tanks, the aircraft began their long journey south along the shoulder of South America. From Trinidad, the planes made their first leap to Atkinson Field in British Guyana. It was a relentless chain of hubs, next to Belém, and then to the strategic hubs of Natal and Recife on the bulge of Brazil. At these coastal outposts, pilots looked out over thousands of miles of open water, preparing for the most daring leg of the trip. The hop across the Atlantic was made possible by a tiny volcanic speck in the middle of the ocean, Ascension Island. Once past Ascension, the aerial bridge finally touched down in West Africa, fanning out into the airfields of Liberia, the Gold Coast, and Sierra Leone. At its peak, a plane took off or landed at Wallerfield every few minutes. C-47 transport planes, B-25 Mitchells, B-24 Liberators moved through the island in a constant stream. This wasn't just a local operation. It also affected the global machine. Without the South Atlantic route and the vital stop at Wallerfield, the Allied victories in North Africa, the Mediterranean, and elsewhere may have been impossible. From here to Atkinson Airfield in what was then British Guyana, and then on to Belém in Brazil, then to Natal and Recife on the Brazil Western Bulge. From Brazil, planes can get to Roberts Airfield in Liberia, Africa, either directly or through the Ascension Islands in the Atlantic. The US government used Pan American Airways as a front. Under the Airport Development Program, Pan Am was contracted to build or improve airfields across the Caribbean and Brazil. This allowed the US to build a military-grade infrastructure under the guise of commercial aviation development, avoiding diplomatic friction with the neutral South American nations. Entry of the United States into the war in December 1941 turned this secret project into the busiest air corridor in human history, literally moving the machinery of victory from the assembly lines of the American Midwest across the Atlantic. What was the cost? To give a perspective, the estimated cost of Army and air bases in the Caribbean at February 1941 was as follows. Trinidad, the highest with 78 million. Then Bermuda, 41 million. Jamaica, 20 million. Antigua and St. Lucia both 4.3 million. Guyana, 4.3 million also. And the Bahamas, 4.2 million. The actual cost was followed. Trinidad, 82 million. That's 4 million above. Bermuda, 40 million. That's 1 million under. Jamaica, 18 million. That's 2 million under. Guyana, 15 million. That's way higher than 4.3 million. St. Lucia, 11 million, up from 4.3. And Bahamas, which is estimated 4.2 million, only cost 273,000. Okay, we pause here for the, this would be the western side of Fort Reed and Wallerfield, where you see the concrete pillars on both sides of the road. There it is, concrete pillars of the entrance and exit of Fort Reed. Now this is from the book Builders and Fighters, U.S. Army Engineers in World War II by Barry Fowler. The island of Trinidad, strategically positioned just north of Venezuela at the southern gateway to the Caribbean, received the largest wartime army construction effort in the region outside of the Panama Canal Zone. Wallerfield and the adjoining army posts of Fort Reed, occupying a 17,000-acre tract in the interior of the island, became the principal army base in Trinidad. After removing the thick canopy of jungle vegetation, crews of the Walsh Construction Company and the George F. Driscoll Company opened a temporary runway on Wallerfield in the summer of 1941. So the George F. Driscoll Company opened a temporary runway on Wallerfield in the summer of 1941, and a 2-mile-long concrete runways the following January and June. They also erected housing for 8,500 men and 51 aviation fuel storage tanks. The heavy demand for local labor caused by this project and simultaneous construction of a large Navy facility on the island led the Corps contractors to import 2,000 workers from neighboring island of Barbados. While the 82 million Wallerfield was the most expensive Atlantic base built by the Corps contractors, it did not meet all the needs of the expanding Trinidad garrison. So we're heading south here to get one of the southern gateways to Fort Reed. This is Pinto Road heading into Santa Rosa. So the Corps thus had its Trinidad contractors begin work in December 1941 on a 5,000-foot runway at Edinburgh Field, well, they say 12 miles to the southwest, and in 1942 on a similar runway at adjoining Xerox Field. But there is a Xerox Road in Dawson Field. They completed the new runways in June 1942 and April 1943. Engineer contractors also oversaw the construction of coast artillery positions and base facilities at Shaka Shakari and Monos Islands between Trinidad and Venezuela. The Caribbean Defense Command took over supervision of the Trinidad and Jamaica districts in 1942 April, leading the Corps to abolish its Caribbean division at that time. Every German submarine activity made the defense of the area imperative for the United States. Those attacks caused a loss of 270 ships in the Caribbean area in 1942, sending 1.2 million tons of cargo to the bottom of the sea. While the Navy conducted most of their anti-submarine campaign, Army planes also chopped up kills from the new bases. So within these boundaries, the Wallerfield base was fully operational and vibrant. And I want to read an excerpt from Nallis. Right. The Battle of the Caribbean, 1941 to 1945, was a naval campaign during World War II. In this battle, the German Navy used U-boats. The term U-boat is derived from the German Unterseeboot, which means undersea boat, which refers to all German Navy submarines. The German naval operation in the Caribbean was codenamed Operation New Orleans. The period 1942 to 1943 was one of the most successful periods for the Caribbean German U-boat operations, in which a 150-mile strip around Trinidad suffered the greatest concentration of shipping losses experienced anywhere during World War II. The Growling Tiger in his 1939 Calypso, "The Best Place is the United States," lamented the poor defensibility of Trinidad by saying, "I'll show you how we are targets for Germany. They can attack us from the north by the Caribbean Sea, ably supported by the Italians. With our ships and planes on the Atlantic Ocean, when it comes to the south, without any doubt, it's an easy thing to peep in the dragon's mouth and then find our defense is rather slick. They can attack us on the west by the Pacific." The Growling Tigers' prediction came to fruition when in 1942, U-161, captained by Albrecht Hercules, sailed into the port of Spain harbor and sank the 7,400-ton American freighter Mohicana and the British tanker British Consul. On the 26th of February 1942, U-156, captained by Werner Hartenstein, sunk the oil tanker La Pierre south of Monos Passage, resulting in the loss of 16 Trinidadian lives. The German U-boats had a successful Caribbean campaign, sinking 400 merchant ships, damaging 56, whilst only 17 U-boats were sunk. The U-boat menace was integral to Trinidad and Tobago's experience during the war. So, a lot of jobs were provided by the American base. And here we have an excerpt again from Navis States. The landscape of women's work had been changed dramatically during the Second World War in occupied Trinidad and Tobago. Many women from the upper and middle classes joined the uniformed services open to females, namely Women's Voluntary Services and the Auxiliary Territorial Services. Some of the women from the upper echelon of society also founded and ran a multitude of organizations in which volunteers worked towards the war effort. So additionally, they helped to nurse and care for wounded or ill servicemen, establish and ran canteens for foreign troops, helped to entertain them with concerts, teas and parties, drove vehicles for military purposes, worked in the censorship service. Incoming and outgoing letters to Trinidad were read and censored in case they contained sensitive military information. Knitted and sewed innumerable garments for troops and prisoners of war abroad, and took up clerical and other posts at the British and American bases and headquarters. So, Lord Invader, in his Calypso Rum and Coca-Cola, sang, and when the Yankees first went to Trinidad, some of the young girls were more than glad. They said that the Yankees treat them nice, and they give them the better price. Calypso captured the idea that women's main contribution was to provide you-know-what services to American soldiers and sailors. They also highlighted the absence of cash flow in households due to economic hardships of the war. This does not mean that there was no oldest profession in the world existing in Trinidad prior to the war, but it was a catalyst for it becoming more prominent, especially near the two main US bases stationed in Chaguaramas and Wallerfield. Right. So we will show the bases southwestern side, which is Fort Reed, here near to Santa Rosa. And here is the last point. This is the southern gate near to the Wallerfield recent circuit. So guys, I hope you got a lot to chew, but I hope you got some good info. You are now more informed about Trinidad and its role in the American military, and where this part of Trinidad was a hustle and bustle, with planes taking off and landing every few minutes. So, as they say in Trinidad, after a time is an X. Now there's no activity as such in Trinidad except when there is car racing at Wallerfield. So guys, I hope this video was entertaining to you as it was to me to research. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and see you in the next video. Until then, bye for now.
खुशहालियाँ ये सबूरे